of this pandemic um, in a reasonably short amount of time compared to where we were 1 year ago. And if things can move forward in that direction, then you all can have a more sociable, relatable experience to what some of us will be sharing throughout this summer STEP program. I know that for myself, um, it's one of the things that I really hope that my students are able to enjoy from their own educational experience, is that of having the peer acquaintances, having that social atmosphere where you can go and vent. You can go talk shit about your teachers and feel good about who you are and what you represent, and just understand it's part of your own growth, right? Like, people vent all the time. It doesn't mean that they mean it, right? Like, I'm sure students have said some foul things about me after a class or what have you. And then next day, who knows? Maybe I spark a conversation that piques their interest in a different way. Um, I've been lucky to have been teaching the last 5 years at UCSB as a lecturer between the Black Studies department, and most recently I've been in the education department the last 2 years. So just being able to uh, share such a breadth of classes, a variety of classes, has been an honor um, as an academic to be able to participate in your guys' education. So again, it's an honor to be here. And I'm just going to go ahead and, as I usually do, dive into this presentation. So bear with me a second while I start to share. Okay. So this presentation, I actually tailored it after a recent talk that I had with a group of at promise students from up north in California. And, my talk is titled "Life is like a Toolbox, from failing to plan to planning to succeed." And as you can tell, there's this truck toolbox, right? That's right in the middle of this screenshot. For me, my story behind that is growing up in my household. My dad has a demolition business. It's a small business. It's family owned, operated. Um, and I always saw these toolboxes. I saw them in the back of his truck. I saw them when his friends came over and, you went downstairs to hang out and you're just jumping from one truck to the other truck, opening up the toolboxes, messing with the different tools. That was my experience, and from a young age, I was able to gauge that from my parents, that as the youngest of three, born to two immigrant parents, Mexican immigrant parents, the resources that they provided me, the the cultural education that they gave me from birth, right? That's part of a toolbox that I inherited from them, right? We're all born with this toolbox. We all have our own specific one. Our families, in my way of seeing it, are the ones that pass that along to us. That's kind of our own version of a type of inherent generational wealth, right? That you pass from one generation to the next. And so with my parents, this was me at around 2 or 3. Um, yeah, I was mad weddle. I'm still light skinned, right? But I lost the blonde hair. My dad's DNA kicked in. So, um, I've grown, I've changed, but that toolbox mentality stayed with me from that young age. Living in Los Angeles, um, in my early years, we lived in the Rampart district of LA. And I don't know if many of you are familiar with it, but it's one of the most notorious areas of LA, notorious for drug violence, gang violence, police brutality. There's even been a movie made about it in last 5-10 years, I want to say, to kind of depict some of this. But beyond all that, some of you might be from that South LA area yourself, and you understand the conditions that I'm talking about. So even as you see this little güerito, this little kid out here, smiling and grinning, outside of the apartment, there was all sorts of chaos. Or the gangs ran our apartment building. They negotiated the traffic of who came in and went. And so early on, I saw a lot of that interactions. I saw um, witnessed, some neighbors committing suicide, just jumping off the top of the roof because their living conditions were just so desperate. And those are traumatic events. Those I'm I'm 10 times the age I was when those things happened in my life. I was 4, so I'm nearly 40 now. And I remember them vividly. They're just stuck there. And I've come to understand through my education and therapy that those are because those have been traumatic events in my life, and they've created those flashpoints, if you will. So again, although I was given my parents' inherent set of tools, my environment, the one I was being raised in, also added to that toolbox, right? Like, you start to see things, you start to learn how to survive in that community, maybe differently than I would have needed to have survived in different communities, right? And this is something that became vividly clear when I was later a college student at UCSB, right? The way I survived back home was different. But initially, one of the things that happened to me, that occurred to me, was that as a child of immigrant parents, right, I only spoke Spanish at home. So when I went into kindergarten, I was an English language learner. And I was labeled as such until 3rd grade when I was tested into GATE. And so why that's important is that because another situation that happened early in my education was that my 1st grade teacher tried to have me held back. And it wasn't necessarily because my math or testing scores were off. It was because she said my English was off. My speaking abilities in English weren't well enough for me to move on to the 2nd grade. And so, interestingly enough, they needed to have me tested in order to prove that they could hold me back. And I ended up testing higher than my grade level for a lot of the subjects. So I was going to, like, in 1st grade, I was going to, like, 2nd grade science, 3rd grade math, 3rd grade English. Like, I was gone half the day. And I look back on it now and I laugh because I can only imagine what that might have triggered in that teacher, right? Who tried to hold me back. And then here I was being sent to 2nd and 3rd grade classes. Um, I'd like to have known what her reaction was, quite honestly, because as I went through in life, I experienced a lot of discrimination in the educational setting. And so I'm even wondering if that was the case at the point with this teacher, or if maybe this teacher just kind of learned from it, right? And I'll even talk about that in a little bit, later in this presentation. But for me, that getting into that GATE program really changed kind of the trajectory that I was going in school. And I've come to understand that even more so as a parent of children, that because we speak a secondary language in our house, they're considered English language learners at school too. So, that's been a battle to work through, but I know that just understanding my history and my own work, that this is something that we'll get through, right? And so it's not that labels hold you back. It's that the people that are pushing those labels, that are promoting those labels, have the power to hold you back, right? Just like that teacher did. But luckily, I was able to navigate around that. And that was one of the tools that I had early on was that academic knowledge, right? Like the vigor to want to go to school. I liked going to school. I was a little nerd. If I'm gonna be honest, I loved reading. I loved writing essays. I was into every little competition we had in class. So for me growing up as a kid, like, I love school, you know. So as I continue to talk to you, I want you to know that. I want you to remember that. Like, I loved school. I loved everything about school. up until I got into junior high school, because I went from honors to at risk. And then eventually I became, as Dr. Rios and his colleagues have come to promote, a not promised student, right? And so here's a couple other pictures of me as a kid. Uh, on the left, it's me in fourth grade, right? You can see my dress game was on point, right? I had my little sweater vest with my tie, my button up. I even had my hair styled to the side, right? Like, um, I told you, I had my point, I had my game on. And this was one of the things that my mom kind of instilled in me when I was a kid. And that was like dressing up to impress, right? Like we had very few moments where we took pictures in our family because we were so poor. We couldn't afford to like have um, camera film. And like some of you might not understand what this means because we live in a digital age, right? Where you can just store pictures on your phone all day long, right? But back when I was growing up, there was this Polaroid cameras, right? That they were an instant picture, develops right out. I know they still have them, but you used to also have to have these flash cubes that you bought that you attached to the camera, and those flash cubes, after every picture you took, one of those bulbs burnt out. So if you had a flash cube of 5, that was good for 5 pictures, right? So those flash cubes cost money. And mom was like, we get 5 pictures. If you guys want to mess around and jack up the pictures, that's what's going to happen. And so um, early on, she just instilled that we needed to look good when those opportunities came, because they didn't come often. And she also wanted us to look good because when she first immigrated to the country, um, she used to work in a sweatshop in downtown LA in Los Callejones, right? The fashion district, they call it. You'll see a lot of like tall buildings in downtown LA in the fashion district area. A lot of the windows are blacked out. Those windows are blacked out for a reason. That's where a lot of the sweatshops operate, right? That's where people like major companies have gone in the past to buy their merchandise from, right? Very skilled workers, but working in extreme conditions in order to produce. And my mom was one of those workers. And what she noticed was that important people in her mind always showed up wearing a shirt and tie. So she told us, you're going to be an important person when you grow up, right? It doesn't matter what all these people are telling you. It doesn't matter what the cops say. It doesn't matter what these cholos say. You're going to be an important person, right? So you need to think of yourself in that way. And it was kind of like later on when I heard somebody say, you need to dress for the job that you want to have, not dress for the position that you're in right now. And that made sense to me because of what my mom told me, right? It was like dress to impress. Um, so, I had, that was part of my tool set. Another part of my tool set was Little League, that picture on the right. I like playing sports. It was an outlet. Many of you would probably know, having played sports yourself, possibly, that that's a positive social angle for many of us to stay out of trouble. And so it later on became that tool that I could turn to when I was in kind of my depressive state, and today as an adult, um, I help coach my children's softball and little league teams. And as a manager, I get to see just how much I still love the sport, and how I want to be a part of these youth also loving the respective sport that they're playing, right? And providing them a space to develop as players, but also come together as a community. And so I learned a lot of that when I was a kid in Little League, right? So I'm mentioning these pictures, but I also want you to see it as tools, right? These are opportunities for us to dig into our own past, into your own past, for you to try to maybe gauge where some of these tools that you have might be hidden. Maybe you haven't tapped into yet. Now, this is right where it starts to get a little bit sketchy, right? You see that arrow, that's me. This is junior high school. And back in the mid 90s, these big poofy jackets were all the rage, especially with football. So I had on my football jacket there, and I was mean mugging the camera because you could tell that's what most of us were doing. So, um, you know, you could start to see in a matter of years, I went from that happy smile, dressed to those nice threads, in my opinion, right, to wearing these more casual types of clothes and jacket, right, sports jacket at that. Now, what do you see around me is also different, right? Some of you might be looking at this picture and saying, man, those look like some of my uncles or aunts or, somebody from my own family in the past. Um, I'm probably about their age, right? So, this is San Bernardino. This was Arrowview Junior High School. And our junior high school actually had a nickname, and they used to call it Arrow Zoo because it was um, it was chaotic. There was a lot of fights. There were multiple gangs on campus, and so if it wasn't, one gang fighting with another gang, it was some spotting up in different places. And so that was kind of my junior high that I went to as a student. But Arrowview wasn't chaotic to me because of my friends, the peers that I had to deal with, right? Growing up with your peers, I think you have a better understanding of them than some of the adults do. You have a better understanding of how to interact with them. Like for me, I wasn't threatened. I didn't feel threatened by these friends of mine or these other students on campus, but I would get teachers that would tell me, look, you're in honors. You can't be hanging out with these people because you're going to be judged by the people you hang out with. So if you're hanging out with these little cholos, these little thugs, that's what we're going to call you. And, in a couple of years, you're just going to be where they're at. You're going to be in juvenile hall. You're going to be smoking weed on the corner. You're going to be doing this. You're going to be doing that. And it already came in with this deficit mentality. Like, to me, a lot of these guys I was walking to school with, they were part of my softball, not softball, little league team. So I'm playing baseball with them on the weekend. These are baseball players. They're not cholos. They just happen to dress a certain way. And, that's all it takes. I had one of my teachers that it got to the point where they were giving us burpees as a punishment. So every time, I walked into class late, I walked into class too hype, like too loud. Anytime I forgot my homework, burpees, right? And I'm not able to perform a burpee, nor will I attempt to on Zoom. But I'm sure that most of you know what a burpee is, right? It's basically a jumping jack into a push-up, and then you stand back up. And he would assign like 200 at a time. So going into one period, having to do that many burpees was difficult, even for the more athletic kids. And I ended up graduating junior high with like over 2,000 burpees that I owed this cat, just because it was, it was excessive. There'd be times where he would have a hall pass for me to kick me out of class and send me to another class because he had already pre told himself that I was going to be too much of a case for him to handle that day. So he would make these passes out early in the morning. So when we got to his class, he already had the pass ready. It didn't matter if we came in hot or not. And this was at the start of like zero tolerance policies. So a lot of what was going on was allowed. They just let people kind of interpret those zero tolerance policies as they wanted, right? So zero tolerance in walking in late, loud, etc., like I pointed out. And so you could go from having a warning for chewing gum in class to getting a referral for chewing gum in class. You get 2 referrals for chewing gum in class, you end up with an on-campus suspension. You end up with a second on-campus suspension, you get at-home suspension. And it just keeps escalating, right? And these are small things. I'm not even talking about fighting. I'm not even talking about like serious stuff. I'm talking about like regular teenage BS that you can find different ways of handling. It was handled with that type of militant punishment. And so I started push myself away from teachers. I wasn't feeling it. I would go home and I'd tell my parents and I ask them for help. And my dad would be like, look, I'm old school. Whatever it is you're doing to make that teacher angry or make you a target. So stop doing it. Whatever it is you're doing, just stop it. He wouldn't quite understand that I'm like, yo, there's times that I'm just walking into class. I haven't even done anything and he has a pass ready. Like he's already done with me before he even saw me that day. And in my mind, I started understanding that that teacher had given up on me. He had given up on me as a student. And it wasn't just him. That's just um, the more, you know, the example that comes most vividly to my head. But I also had another teacher that would make us stand up and face the corner while we did our science work, and we weren't allowed to turn around and watch her while she lectured. It was that old timeout in the corner thing. Sometimes she would have us walk laps around the building for like 10 minutes at a time. And if we came into class and still seemed disruptive, we'd have to walk laps for another 10 minutes. It's more of that, discipline to avoid dealing with a student, avoiding that interaction than it actually was helping or remediating the situation, right? So that mean mug that you catch there is because I wasn't a happy kid in junior high. I wasn't happy with my surroundings. Um, we were poor. Also at that time, we were going through a bankruptcy. My dad's small business had been robbed by this bigger contractor, took all of our money that was invested in that job. Dad's job went bankrupt. We almost lost our house. We were like collecting cans, recycling, just doing whatever we could to make a couple of dollars here and there. I remember peeling copper wire in the backyard, helping dad like piece out different salvage materials from jobs like radiators. You had to cut them into 3 different pieces, but you would get more money than if you just sold the whole radiator. You learn a lot of those things because it's a different form of survival. When you're that poor, when you're living like day to day, you learn the value of some of the things that some people take for granted, like trash, right? Like scrap. We had a friend of ours that worked at a donut shop. And I remember going early with my mom, walking to school past that donut shop, and that lady would come outside and she'd have like 1 or 2 trash bags, like black trash bags full of donuts. And they were day old donuts, but they were going to be thrown out because that company didn't sell day old donuts. So I remember like being super happy because we take all these donuts home, and I'm like, yeah, man, it's little gordito's paradise. You get a donut every chance you get. You go to the garage, boom, 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 boom. But it's not healthy eating, one. And two, this was basically somebody else's trash that we were eating as our food. And as a kid, you don't see it the same way as the adult, right? You're being resourceful. You're trying to find a way to, patch meals here and there for your kids. And my mom would even go as far as like passing them out to some of the other people that we knew in the community that were also as broke as us. So, if we didn't have money for food, we didn't have money for clothes. And in junior high, you're a teenager, clothes are more noticeable. And, I'd have, I was wearing skinny jeans when they weren't cool, way before the whole skinny jean fad went through. I was getting beat up for them. I was getting beat up for wearing pants that were too tight, t-shirts that were like 2 or 3 years old, right? So we were shopping at the outlets and I was getting like 4 t-shirts for $20, but they were from 1990 and I'm wearing them in 1995. People are cracking jokes. And then we'd get into a fight. I was chased and beat up, man, just for the type of clothes that I wore. So I was fighting these different battles in different spots. And I know that a lot of kids go through the same thing, but at that time it felt like it was just me. And I remember that, like, going from junior high to high school, like my whole demeanor changed, my whole attitude changed. Like if you look on the left side, I have my clothes, you could tell, just too baggy. The t-shirt was like down in the middle of my forearm. Um, I'm not smiling in that little league picture, and little league was my go-to, right? It's the thing that for me was my safety net when I needed it. And the picture below is just a random picture that I had from high school. I just didn't take pictures. There aren't many pictures of me outside of the few that exist in yearbooks or maybe from my little league. I didn't take pictures. And part of the reason was we didn't have the same accessibility, right, like we do now with cell phones. So technology accessibility is one. But two was like, I really wasn't into taking pictures of myself. You know, I didn't feel too highly of myself. It's not like um, I had people that were screaming at me, that I was handsome or anything. Like I just said, I was getting beat up and bullied because I was overweight and um, had clothes that were too tight. So my response was um, to buy baggier clothing, right? Fit in, blend in. And with that, it's not just the clothing, there's also an attitude, right? Like the attitude wasn't something that I was pretending, it was something that I just allowed myself to become more angry in because, um, these teachers weren't supporting me. I didn't feel as though I was going to school and it was like both of us, like even the days I tried, like that teacher would just kick me out. And when I got to high school, it was even worse. Like when I was a freshman, I had my math teacher tell me as a freshman in high school and I was in honors, okay? He told me that if I went to college, I would be a waste of financial aid when I went to college. And this same math teacher had been my sister and my brother's math teacher, and they were both in college. And he knew that one of them was in a master's program, and he still had enough to tell me, right, that I'd be a waste of financial aid. And at that moment, like right now, I look back on it with a different response, but in that moment, it broke me. In that moment, I cried. I left the classroom running. I remember I was in my football jersey because it was Friday and there was a varsity football game. I was on the freshman team, so we were supposed to go, and we showed our support by wearing our game jerseys. Long story short, the football players outside, they're laughing at me because I'm crying. But, those types of words cut. And when you're human, you feel it, right? So it doesn't matter whether you're in the hood, whether you're here, whether you're there. Some phrases, some words are triggering and can hurt. And, up to that point, you know, I hadn't had much support from many teachers in school. I couldn't count any teachers that I counted on at that moment. And so I just slid away. I was like, maybe these teachers are right. So at some point in that year, I also got jumped into one of the neighborhood gangs. We we would call them a gang today. Back then, we called them crews. And in those crews, um, it was the same thing. You got jumped in, and there was like 12, 13 of us that first year from the football team. That later on we recruited another set, and it got to the point where you know there was so much gang violence from the different gangs, different territories, even the crews that were coming up, that they started setting up injunctions in San Bernardino. So gang injunctions, if you're not familiar with that, that's like if they catch more than two people that are labeled in the gang database together, they arrest you. That's a violation. You go to jail. Like it becomes a felony, right? And that's just for walking with somebody that that's affiliated or known. Now, you might be wondering or telling yourself, well, they're gang members, right? Why are they hanging out together? They're telling themselves they're going to commit some kind of crime, plotting it, but that's not the reality of it. Like you don't have to commit an actual crime, right, in order to be affiliated, in order to be associated, right? It's just a profile, it's a memory. So oftentimes, police officers create this definition for you through a couple of interactions they might have loosely had with you or a family member that might be a gang member, right? So you have a couple cousins that got jumped into a gang. There's a high likelihood that they would label you as an affiliate or associate just based off of that. Okay, so if you're really good friends with those two guys, same thing, affiliate or associate, right? You get caught driving these guys around, and there's two of them. That's one way for your butt to end up on the gang database because there's two known gang members in the same car. You're the driver. These are all situations that people in my community were going through, right, with these gang injunctions. And so they started really cracking down on us. Like in high school, it was crazy the amount of suspensions, the amount of expulsions that occurred, right? There, I remember being told like my freshman year that only about 40% of us were going to graduate. And my teacher said, of that 40% of this high school that graduates, half of that 40% is going to come from the honors program. And that was like mind blowing because, you know, you have a school with that much failure and the little bit of success, you can really see where it's coming from. And that's where they're investing all this money. So it blew my mind again when that teacher told me what they told me about me being a failure, a waste of financial aid, you know, and this is just high school. And when I joined that gang, it was to feel like I needed something to survive. If I didn't have these people to have my back, I was gonna get jumped, beat up, and I might end up dead that way. Or I wouldn't feel like I had the moral support of people that understood the same situations I was going through with my teachers. Right. And that's what they were. They were like my secondary family at that point. Um, my family, you know, I had a brother 10 years older. I had a sister in college. My mom didn't speak English and you know, she stayed at home. My dad was working 60 to 80 hours a week, gone, you know, most of the time. So I really felt like an only kid. And I had to navigate a lot of this by myself. And I made some decisions that I would later regret because I had friends that ended up being killed. I had my best friend's brother murdered, um, tortured, murdered, and left like a block away from his own family's house. Right. And so for me, when I decided to leave that street life in high school, I was lucky that I had a friend that came into my life and told me about um, how to challenge the system, right? And how to challenge the fact that um, people are trying to create a definition for me that really isn't me, and I need to understand how to combat that. So I need to read. I need to educate myself. Things I wasn't doing. He's like, these are all tools that you have available to you in school. Like he literally used those words. He said, these are tools available in school. And that spoke to me because I remembered the tools that I'd been thinking about growing up with my parents: culture, religion, language, right? Music, learning how to use the actual tools from the toolbox to fix things, right? To make money for us when we're poor, about to lose our home, right? He threw this at me and it kind of opened my mind to say, okay, I need to plan the next stage in my life. The next stage of my life is almost here. I need to wake up, right? And so, um, you know, I went to work for my dad first because I was like, I need to set myself straight. I need to get disciplined and I need to work. You know, I can't go to college if I'm not prepared to any capacity. And you know what? Even as much as I wanted to go to college, I knew that I wasn't ready. I gave myself that opportunity to grow and mature before I took on that additional responsibility. And so, as much as it was difficult for me to graduate high school, not go straight to college, I knew it was the right choice for me at that moment, right? Because dealing with all that street life stuff, there was things that I needed to overcome before I could immerse myself that way. And in my situation, I needed that time off, right? And so for me, when I when I actually worked with dad, it got to the point where um, it got too hard to work with dad. You know, working with family is difficult, and working with my dad felt especially difficult for me. And one of the last jobs we did was in Riverside. We're working at this college, and we're remodeling these dorms. And I was sitting there thinking, why am I remodeling these dorms when I should be a college student living in these dorms? I should be in this school taking classes. I should be on that baseball team. I should be. And my friend stopped me. He said, but you're not. Pick up the broom, homie. Let's go. You know, like, get to work. And that planted a seed in me and said, you're right. I'm not, but I should be. And because I had that I should be mentality in that moment, I registered for college. You know, when I registered for college, I had a buddy who was going to become a mechanic with me. We had this whole program we had found from a community college that was going to train us, even get us a job once we were certified. And the craziest thing happened when we were filling out the admissions application. Um, it was taking too long to get some of the information, and I ended up having to leave because my buddy had to prepare his car for a lowrider show. He had this really nice car and he needed to wash it to have it ready for the show. So I took off and went home. And by the time I got home, I was getting phone calls at my parents' house that my friend had been shot, killed. Minutes after I left, he'd been shot and killed in a drive-by. Like, some people had gone by. It's the wrong house, it's the wrong guy. But they ended up shooting a few individuals in the process. And so in that moment, I almost gave up on my dream of going to college. I remember being at the funeral thinking that it was a sign that my buddy had been killed, that, you know, that was a dead end for me. And his mom looked at me and said, nope, one of you needs to move forward. And if you go forward, I know you'll at least carry him with you, right? Excuse me. So as I moved forward in my own education, one thing that I always remembered, carried with me, was the fact that um, I had friends that were close to me that had died before they had ever got to experience adulthood, you know, before they ever got to even experience a college party, right? For some of you. um, and now with my kids, it's crazy because I look at it and I'm like, wow, these guys didn't even have an opportunity at a family, right? They were criminalized as teenagers, and some of them fell into the traps of the street life. And you know, whether or not that's your plan, you know, drive-bys have a way of getting you too. So I was going through a really big moment, and I try to go to school. You know, like, for me, I was doing it not just for me, but for those people. And you know what? I had bad habits. I ended up getting kicked out of 3 community colleges. Three, right? You know how hard that is? I mean, it was hard. Um, but I'll tell you what, it was motivation when I finally got my stuff straight, because after that first year, I became a tutor. Um, and when I became a tutor, you know, I started making friends within the tutoring department. So a couple of my buddies and I really took a liking to this teaching thing, and it showed me how much I had a passion for education, and I knew that that's where my future was going to be. I also ended up meeting, ironically enough, um, a student who would later on end up becoming my wife. So first, she was my peer, and I mentored her a little bit because I was a little bit older, but she's shown me so much, and I've been able to grow so much from her own experiences as well, because we met as college students. We've been able to graduate our community college. We both transferred to UCSB as undergraduates. Um, we graduated UCSB, and we both hold graduate degrees. You know, she has a master's degree in education. I have a master's and a PhD in education myself. And when we met at Moreno Valley College, that wasn't the case. I just gotten hired as a tutor, 1 year removed from having been kicked out. And, she was having her own struggles in life. We're 18, 20, 21. And for me, I always say that I'm lucky that I've been able to grow with her, because like my whole second half of my life really has been spent with her. Um, so it's helped with the healing also, because the things that changed for me, right, was that I was introduced to teachers and staff that spoke my language, right? They didn't judge me, they guided me, they informed me. But most of all, they also showed that they cared, right? These people were willing to break barriers, break bread, um, and show their true selves, right? To let me understand that that's how far I needed to dig deep to get to where I wanted to go, right? If I wasn't willing to go there, I couldn't ask anybody else to do so. So I surrounded myself by those people, and they helped me create these goals for myself in school, outside, and they've been supportive ever since, right? The Puente program, which helped me tremendously when I was in community college, um, really assisted me. And I know that for some of you, community college wasn't your route, all of you probably. And what I want you to understand though, right, is that in transitions, right, some of you might feel as though you're not prepared, right? Or you weren't prepared in high school and here you are in college, or you are prepared from high school, but you don't know how that will apply in college. And that's a very similar experience for a transfer student, right? Because we're transitioning from, a community college is a different system than a four-year university. And so in that capacity, right, this is where I kind of want you to draw these connections as well, because you're going to need staff and faculty mentors, graduate students you're going to lean on to get this experience, to get the knowledge that you're going to need to set yourself up for the next stage of your own journey, of your own life, right? So, this is where we draw those connections. This is where you and I can understand that part of the struggle, right? Transitioning into UCSB. Don't know if this is your home community, but for me, coming from San Bernardino to UCSB, that two different SBs, way two different SBs. San Bernardino is in the top 5 most impoverished communities in the country, and Santa Barbara is considered the American Riviera, right? And so we have Oprah as one of our residents on the outskirts. We have a lot of financial capital that's around this town, this university. And so this was also the place that I saw my first for real Chanel purse, Chanel bag. And the craziest thing was that um, I saw a real Louis Vuitton for the first time, and it had a dog in it. And it blew my mind, because I was like, you just messed up that bag. And I didn't use messed up as the phrase, but where I come from, if you paid that much money for a Louis, what are you doing putting a dog's butt in it? So a lot of those things I was introduced to and helped navigate past by my friends, these graduate students, these peers, but staff from EOP were tremendous in this process for me as well. I actually ended up becoming a peer mentor myself as an undergraduate, right? I worked in the financial aid office as a peer. I worked for admissions in the transfer services department as a peer. I worked for EOP as a transfer and non-traditional student peer. For me, gaining all that knowledge was about putting my education into planning, right? So if I'm able to resource build, then I'm able to put it all together for the next leg of my future, right? And so UCSB helped me to continue this process, right? They introduced me to all these additional resources to add to my toolbox. Later on, when I graduated from my undergrad degree and I started my graduate work, I didn't have anybody in my family I could turn to and say, hey, how do you start this PhD process? I was the first in my family, right? And what I did have was a bunch of other knuckleheads that was the first in their family. We're all trying to figure it out together, right? And so there's some, what do you call them? Growing pains, right? As you will. But again, just being able to share in that process with other people just made the ride a whole lot more fun for me, right? Some of those tools, that social emotional support, therapy and counseling services, you got to hit it. You know, I tell my nephew, mind, body, and soul, don't just work out your muscles. Don't just do yoga and say that that's going to be enough for you. You know, like you need to sometimes dig deeper. And when you need to dig deeper, you have those services available to you. If you go to EOP, they'll help you manage it. They'll help you figure out which ones maybe you should approach first, how you should approach it. Those are all invaluable lessons that you'll get from your EOP staff and support groups, right? There's these real issues that we deal with, cultural stigma, right, of going to therapy. Forget about it, move past it. I dealt with it, um, but I'm starting to see that in my own strength of sticking with my process, of sticking with my mental health. Um, it's been contagious to my parents. Like they're starting to use some of the things that I use. And these are people that were like, are you crazy? Like, no, like literally, are you crazy? Is that why you're going to therapy? Because only that whole stigma, you know, and it's harsh sometimes. And maybe some of you don't get it in that same direct way that I did, right? But it's a stigma nonetheless in many communities. So really try to understand it as, if you know you're exercising your body and you really want to maintain that balance in your life to perform as academically well as you can, the mental side of it is a big factor too, right? Releasing is important for you. um, I deal with imposter syndrome, survivor syndrome, right? And I've been able to go to counseling and therapy to help me with that. And again, these are strategies my family's been able to take on as well. So it might feel difficult in the beginning. You might feel like the only one in your family or your circle, but trust me, if it's beneficial to you, you know, just stick to the process and they'll understand you. They might even grow from it too, right? These are some other tools. Reflexivity, right? Being reflexive is different than reflecting, right? Don't just think about the past, but improve a response to that same situation in the future. So this is a way that you can privilege check yourself, right? So if you're coming into this environment as a male and you start to mansplain some stuff and you have a group of female peers that are telling you, hey, we don't need you to mansplain that. There's other ways you can participate in this though. That's a moment for you to check yourself. And then the next time you feel you're in a similar situation, maybe you don't start telling other people in the same capacity. Maybe you start asking questions, right? And that's something that you learn through this reflexivity process. It's an internalized approach to your self-growth, right? So you might not like it because it might be contrary to what you know, right? I grew up in a highly conservative, old school Mexican household where I, you know, my dad thinks he's like some 70-year-old white man from the South, right? But I told you, he's a Mexican immigrant. So trust me, a lot of the stuff that I've had to grow past, move past, been difficult because I'm like, that's not what I grew up to learn. But this is, you're at college, right? If all you knew you could learn out, you wouldn't need college, man, right? You could just pick up YouTube, but we know what YouTube's like too, right? So have this growth mindset. Learn from your failures, right? That's where you can learn from it. Versus having a fixed mindset of avoiding challenges or just sticking to what you know, right? Reflexivity is an excellent tool for you to grow as a critical thinker in the university process. Friends, keep a tight circle of positive and supportive people that are willing to challenge you when you need it. Call you on your bullshit. You know, are you going to class? Are you taking, you know, your whole life experience as serious as you should? Right? You need those friends, not just yes people. Knowledge, take this coursework, your professional development. Like I mentioned, I work in all these departments. You could work in those departments too. Nothing holding you back, just an application. And so if you use that professional development, you could end up with a career. If you ask around EOP, you'll see how many students or how many of the staff members are former students from UCSB or another UC, and you'll understand why they're a part of the EOP family, right? Why they still help the process for all of you transitioning into UC. right? And take it. And this is part of your community service. Many of you will join organizations, fraternities, sororities, clubs of all sorts and types. Use them as an opportunity to help build the community from outside and make them more of a strength than they have felt themselves to be in the past, right? As students, it's our privilege to be able to help communities grow, not criticize them for where they're at, right? And Isla Vista is a great space for some of you to grow and learn that mentality. Take those degrees, use them to your advantage, but don't ever use them to hold over somebody else, right? Outside of a space like this, a formal space, I don't go around telling people to call me doctor. Like, I'm not Coach Dr. Galicia, right? It's like Coach Mario, or, you have to kind of understand how to draw those parameters too. So don't get too carried away by the titles. Don't get too carried away by that process of the professional side of you. Also understand there's a personal side of you. Some of you might internalize that a little bit more, and that's great. But just know that that part of you exists and use that in your process too. The last thing I'm going to say is, or share with you, is like, these are some of um, my memories from these moments. The first one is actually the top left. I graduated with a bachelor's degree, dual bachelor's degree, Chicano Studies Soc. I just finished my commencement speech. I gave the speech in front of 8,000 people for social sciences back in 2008. I shared my master's graduation with my wife. And you see, we're wearing those puente stoles from community college. We brought that with us, right? The past always moves with us. The last picture at the bottom, no, it's not Halloween, and I'm not trying to dress up like a Hogwarts extra. That was me getting my PhD, and I was delivering the commencement speech in front of a couple thousand people that day as well. So, coming from where I came from to almost being kicked out of high school, to having kicked out of 3 community colleges, to coming back and giving 3 commencement speeches, earning a PhD, starting a family. There's community work we've done too. Freedom for Youth. It's an organization that I work with intimately. I'm on the board with, and I advocate for you all to reach out for and look into to see how you can provide services to. They reach out to local youth from Los Prietos Boys Camp, as well as local community youth, to help them avoid interacting with law enforcement agencies. I also coach Little League. I'm in the PTA. So when parents ask me, you talk about all this involvement, what do you do? I don't just want to talk the talk, right? This is my beautiful family. Nothing critical thinking or deep about that. Just needed to share that this has been also a creation in this process. School, for you, your education is a part of your human process, right? They don't have to be mutually exclusive. I was lucky to be surrounded by mentors that showed me that you could build a family while also building your education and your career. So strive for whatever you feel you deserve in your life, and make sure to reach out to those people like EOP so that you feel the support, so you understand the commitment you have from the community as well. It's not just a lone process. A process makes it an institutional thing for us at UCSB. Everybody's involved from different places, okay? If you ever have any questions, you want to reach out to me, you need me for a talk, you need me to come in and do anything for you, your organization, please feel free to take this information down. I'm available year round. Just hit me up, I know this is pushing in at the end of the time, so I don't know if we have time for questions or not.
Yes. First and foremost, thank you so much, Mario, for being here and for sharing everything. At this time, if you're able to, feel free to put your cameras back on so we can see each other. And if you have any questions at all, definitely let Mario know. I think that on this first day, one of the reasons why I asked Dr. Galicia to come in and speak is because it just really sets the tone for what we'll be talking about for the next couple of weeks. Some of y'all I see in the chat, you can really resonate. really resonated with the story, with Mario's story and background. Maybe some of you didn't as much, but at least you're thinking about the other sides to entering this university, right? There's the academics. I know many of you have been thinking about the academics, but there's this whole other personal growth journey that you'll undergo, and we just encourage you to reach out. Where a lot of us might be a little bit further along on that timeline of breaking these cycles, right? And this is what Mario's really doing, is breaking some of the cycles so that his family won't have to go through some of the same things that he went through. But at the same time, we can remind them and build strength from some of those experiences at the same time. So yeah, I just want to open it up. I've already spoken too much. Just want to open it up for any comments or questions from any of the students.
Any hands up?
Yes, feel free to unmute. Zenaida,
You know, I did want to mention, there you go, Zenaida.
Oh, no, sorry, go for it, go for it.
No, go, you first.
Oh.
I'll talk for a whole hour, you go.
I just want to say thank you